Shana Tova, everyone. It's okay. You're here, and we're hoping that there's lots of people online too. Thank you for coming tonight. You know, our Slichot service is always one of, I think, the most meaningful, and it's such an appropriate way to start the High Holy Days, to put us into that mode and into that space in our minds. I missed it a lot last year, and we had the online one, and that was also going on tonight with the Reform Movement of Canada across the country, and hopefully you had a chance to catch it. And but ours is special, so it's nice to be back. It's nice to be back in the room, even if we are socially distanced and there's just a handful of us compared to previous years. It's nice to be in our sanctuary, to be able to sing our melodies, to hear Joyce on the piano, Cantor Cohen with us this evening, to change the covers of our Torahs, and to continue with our own minhagim and traditions. One of which was something that we've done now a few times. We've done big programs for Slichot, and we've done meaningful, hopefully they've all been meaningful, but we've done very personal programs for Slichot as well. And one of my favorite formats, and with Rabbi Brown as well, we both agreed that this was the year to do it, was to invite congregants to reflect on those three pillars of the High Holy Days, those three lenses through which we're supposed to and are hopefully encouraged to view this time of year, to view our year that was past and the year that is ahead. The lenses of tshuva, tefillah, and tzedakah. And if those words sound familiar to you, they come from the liturgy. As we intone our sins during the High Holy Days, we're reminded that even as those sins weigh down upon us, tefillah, tshuva, and tzedakah, which will translate as tefillah as prayer or mindfulness, perhaps. Tshuva, which growing up was always translated as repentance, but I think return is a far stronger and more appropriate word. And tzedakah, which also growing up, they often translated that as charity, but it's so much more than charity. It's righteous acting and righteous doing. And so we're reminded as we list all of those sins that are communal but also personal, that those three things, tefillah, tshuva, and tzedakah, can temper God's decree. But they can also, beyond that, add meaning and purpose to our lives. And so tonight, we are going to hear from three members of our congregation, Sarah Chiachi, Arthur Gutman, and Karen James. Thank you for accepting our invitation to reflect on the meaning of those themes, or at least one of those themes for each of them. And hopefully afterwards, after all three have spoken, we'll have a chance maybe to even ask some questions. That'll go till about 9:30, then we'll break, we'll have an oneg. You can do it in here if it's nice out, as it's been such a gorgeous day. We can go outside to the tent in Sarah's garden, in the Shalom garden. A garden that Sarah has made possible. I want to say that tonight. And then we'll come back in at 10 o'clock. We'll begin with Havdalah, and then we have our evening service as we change our modes and our melodies, and even the covers of the Torah and the covers of the rabbis and the cantor as well, as we'll put on our robes and enter into this holy space. So let's begin first. Sarah, we would love to have you join us on the bima. And as you make your way up, I think Sarah's achievements and accomplishments and contributions are well known to everyone in our congregation. From her cookbook to her leadership in our sisterhood, her leadership in the Jewish Food Bank, her leadership with Hadassah, her leadership with B'nai B'rith Women International, her leadership in all things that our Temple Shalom and the Vancouver Jewish community. And I'm also very clear that Sarah never wants me to help her, but every time I watch, I want to. I do know that. So I'm going to turn this microphone on for you. That's the wrong one.
Just remember, you said all the time I needed.
All the time you needed, as long as we finish on time. And Arthur and Karen have to speak after.
Okay, thank you for everyone who's here, and the people who are here are very important. I'm going to go back over 90 years, and it'll tie together. I'll be brief with each one of them, but they'll make sense to you at the end. It starts out when I was a child. I was about 7 years old. Both myself and my father were in the Royal Columbian Hospital. I was there for an extended visit. He was in a small building that housed the tuberculosis patients. And since at that time it was not thought to be contagious, the nurses would ride me over in my wheelchair and let me visit with my father and all the other patients. Shortly after I returned home, a strange man came to our house. He had a skull cap on and a beard and spoke in a funny language. I later found out it was Rabbi Pastinsky. He had come to tell my mother that we were one of 2 Jewish families living in Westminster that was a train ride through the forest to Vancouver. She had to move, and move we did. They found a place for us for a couple of weeks so that we could find a house, and they would take care of us while we were there. Well, my first weekend, I heard someone screaming, just out loud, and it was terrifying. I opened the door, and I saw the landlord's wife with blood running down her face, and her hand locked in the door, and she couldn't get in, she couldn't get out. I called for my mother. She said, "Come in and mind your own business. That's their business, it's not yours." Well, a short time after that, the Jewish community were taking care of us, and there was a lady who used to come. She would look in the cupboards, and she would make sure that I had good shoes, and we had the proper food and everything. My mom thought she was being nosy about what we had. That wasn't her purpose. Her purpose was to take care of us. And we got to be very good friends. In my early years, she gave me a book for my birthday to my dearest Sarah. But just about that time, the tuberculosis caught up with me. And I ended up in a preventorium. It was a tuberculosis for children, and it was in the wilds of Burnaby. And my mother could not get there, but this lady, who was Teresa Bloomberg, managed to get to see me often. And she became very close to me. And when I came out, it was fine. The tuberculosis was gone. And I started to become a member of the community. Young Judeans, junior Judeans. There was only one problem. My father was not Jewish. Now, how many of you have seen Fiddler on the Roof? You remember the youngest daughter, okay? It was okay for me to be friends with the young people, but for his parents, I was treif. They could not take out a shiksa. They had nothing to do with me, and the parents were horrified at the thought of their sons becoming involved with a shiksa. There were other things that were a little hard to take. As a non-half Jew, when the other girls could light the Shabbos candle, I could not. Anything that was really important, it was not allowed. There was only the Orthodox synagogue in town, and it made a difference. Eventually, you leave the community. And I did not come back to the community until my son, who's here with me, he and Jane were in Toronto. And he phoned me and he said, "Mom," he said, "I'm not having another winter in Toronto. We're coming home, but Jane is going through conversion with Rabbi Plout, and we need to have a synagogue to go to." Rabbi Plout had not mentioned, but someone mentioned to me, Rabbi Plout is with the Reform community. a synagogue has been formed in Vancouver, Temple Shalom, just a few years earlier. So, first night I went to, there were no services on Saturday, they were only on Friday nights. I went to the synagogue, and the greeter was Jan Pollock. Jan Pollock had been Miss Jan, one of our most loved counselors at the National Jewish Women's Council Camp. Also there were Ted Wormsley, Arthur and Glenda Gutman, Bonnie and Steve Gertzman. Bonnie was the sisterhood president. Steve was the brotherhood president. Within a month, I became the first paid secretary of Temple Shalom. This is a long time ago. And things changed. One of the other members introduced me, and I forgot. Glenda brought me to the first sisterhood meeting that I attended. I think I drove to 41st and Dunbar. We met there, and she took me in, so I didn't have to go in alone. And someone else asked me to join B'nai B'rith Women. And between the two, a whole new world opened up. With the sisterhood, there were many things to do, to volunteer with, and B'nai B'rith the same. In 1982, Rabbi Brinkman organized a 3-week tour of Israel. And there I was introduced to the Jewish National Fund. And there was so much to see and so much to do and so much to do here in Vancouver. And also, B'nai B'rith Women had a home for emotionally disturbed children. Children who were recommended by the Ministry of Health, and if they couldn't do something for them, they were going to go into a mental hospital and stay there. Carrie has been there. It's an amazing place, 70% recovery at that time with no drugs whatsoever. If any child was in hurt or crying or anything, the janitor, the cleaning man, the kitchen help, no matter who it was, they went to their help. And it's something that I'm still very much involved with. And from there, in 1984, our president, Jeannie Cohen, went into a home of a senior, and she opened the cupboard door and she found cat food. The woman didn't have a cat, but the tuna fish in cat food was cheaper to buy than tuna. And so our B'nai B'rith Women's chapter, a few of us got together, we voted to start to collect food. And in order to do that, we needed to know who to give it to. So we formed an alliance with the Jewish Family Service. We would provide the food, they would provide the people, not people, but numbered cards that said how many there were in the family and what they might need that would be in the way of special foods, kosher, salt-free, whatever. And I remember our first food day, 4 of us met together in Carol Fader's basement on the workbench and packed 29 bags of food. It was only to be for a very short time. A few months ago, Arthur was with me when we went to the hub, where it's now a place where it's called the hub. We're serving food and taking care of people, Vancouver, Burnaby, Coquitlam, many outside places where people whose children have moved because it's too expensive to live there, or they have moved because it's too expensive to live there. That 29 bags has really grown until today, and we still provide food. It's now Jewish Women International, and I have made a promise to everyone who donates. Every penny, every dollar they donate goes directly to food. Our volunteers take care of the rest. There's no overhead, and we're sure. Recently I saw something advertised there's one organization that 43% is going towards staffing and publicity. And I received a check for $8,000 from someone who always tells me this must go, one, for food only, no overhead, no spending, and it must be anonymous, and I must never be asked to donate more. I'll decide when I donate more. And it's going to be difficult when I'm gone, but that'll be his worry. Okay, now in 1994, I had been interested in domestic abuse. And from the Jewish Women International, the head office in Washington, they asked me if I would take on the duty of raising public awareness of domestic abuse in the Jewish community. That doesn't happen, you know. It's a shanda. You don't talk if it does. And Temple Shalom has come in as a very important part. When we had the food bank and we were worrying about food, it was Temple that helped us. Long before Operation Isaiah, Temple Shalom had the High Holy Day appeal. And the downstairs room used to be filled almost to half full, and full in the room, but halfway up the room with bags of food that they brought on their own. And something I could always be sure of was Temple Shalom. The same thing happened with domestic abuse. The first seminar, and the heads of all of the Jewish women's organizations were invited to attend, was held at Temple Shalom. From that first meeting, a group was formatted called Jewish Women Against Domestic Abuse. The second seminar was still at Temple Shalom, and the third one was at Beth Hamidrash. We brought in Rabbi Twersky, and that place was filled with blockheads. They were sitting on the bima, they were everywhere. But no matter what I needed help with, it was always Temple Shalom. It's made a lot of difference to me. Anyone who doesn't think about volunteering is losing very much in life. It's made my life whole, and there are so many others. I remember way back many years ago, we were on 10th Avenue. The Temple members adopted a family. I can't remember where it was. Arthur, do you remember where the family came from? Vietnam. They were both people, that's right. And more recently, we had other people here, a young family that came, the father and his 2 children. The wife had been killed in what country? I'm bad with names. And the father died, and Temple adopted the 2 children. They were in their teens, and they took care of them until they were in their 20s and on their own. And since then, there have been families adopted from Rabbi Dan, where?
From Kurdistan, Syria and Kurdistan.
Yes, and it's
and Afghanistan as well.
And one of the most beautiful things I've seen was a couple of years, there were children from the Ismaili and our youth downstairs and in the center and here making sandwiches, laughing and joking together, and they were taken down to Main Street by Rabbi Bregman to give out the food to the people. Of course, as payment, they went for ice cream, and it was a wonderful thing to do. I've watched the little kids out in the hall stacking the boxes of cereal, small ones, the boxes of cereal to come. They're learning early what giving is to others. I can't say thank you enough. In the last 3 years, without Temple Shalom, the rabbinate, the office staff, and the members, I have been taken care of I have never been alone, and I've never wanted for anything. And I have to say thank you, and I wish all of you and your family and friends a good year.
Thank you, Sarah. That was wonderful. Just
15
wonderful.
minutes?
I wasn't even counting. I was riveted. I'm just standing. Just have me standing close enough to you that if you need help, I'm here.
That's a bad word to do.
I know. I'm not moving it. Okay. I think actually, Sarah, you're the first to use the ramps, so I wanted to actually make sure the angle was okay. So, does it work okay? Okay, good. Good. Okay, good. As Sarah makes her way back to her seat, this is a perfect opportunity to talk about Project Isaiah for those of you here, and particularly for those of you that are watching at home. Every year, the Jewish community on the High Holy Days, particularly the synagogues, gather food for Project Isaiah. It's their biggest food drive of the Jewish Food Bank of the year. And I can tell you that between ourselves and Sharet Tzedek in particular, a little bit of BI, there's a friendly competition between the three synagogues. We have won every single year for the last 5 years by hundreds of pounds, and I do not intend to allow COVID to wreck our streak. Yes, Sarah? I'm going to do the appeal. Sarah also comes to my office and says, you have to do it, and you have to tell us. I'm doing it now even, Sarah. So even though we were not going to have 1,000 people in the sanctuary, we should have food equivalent of the thousands of people that would come. So please, you can also make a financial donation online, but this competition is actually about the weight of food. So bring lots of food and bring heavy food. Heavy, heavy food. I don't want to see any, popcorn or anything. First of all, it's got to be healthy food. It's got to be healthy food, the kind of whole foods that people need, and heavy, like beans and rice and bags of oatmeal and, giant watermelon. No, they don't take fruit and vegetables at this time of year. But heavy food, please, and lots of it. And we'll remind you, of course, throughout the holidays to bring it between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And if you brought it early, we'll find a place for it as well. Cantor Arthur Gutman has been a mainstay in our congregation long before I was here. I think before Rabbi Bregman or after? Yes, before Rabbi Bregman as well. Arthur and Glenda are true and dear friends and stalwarts of our community. It's been a privilege, Arthur, to officiate with you at so many functions, to have your counsel, to have your insight, to have the benefit of yours and Glenda's history, as with Sarah, of our congregation and the Minhagim. And Arthur, it's really a privilege to get to hear your story as you share with us. I should have mentioned Sarah spoke about tzedakah. Arthur's going to speak about tefillah, and Karen will speak about tshuva. Arthur Gutman. Arthur, you're allowed to remove your mask when you're on the bima.
You got to do this dramatically. Rabbi, we were family number 32 in the congregation the year after it started. And we joined as the result of a man named Rabbi Goldman, who was the chaplain at the time at Columbia University in New York. And he came here to do High Holy Day services. It's the first ones we attended. We joined immediately after. Shema Koleinu Adonai Eloheinu Hu Rachus v'rachem aleinu, aleinu. V'kabel b'rachamim, b'rachamim v'ratzon, et tefilotenu. Hear our voice, Adonai our God, have compassion upon us, and accept our prayers with favor and mercy. What I just sang occurs as part of the Amidah in every morning service except Shabbat. And it occurs on the high holy days. The words are a little bit different in the latter part of it. I only did the first line. Our prayers can be entreaties, as this one is. God, hear our prayer. But it's also a call to action. For God to hear our prayer, we have to express a prayer. There's an action that we have to undertake. I'm going to speak very personally, as Sarah did, how prayer has affected almost every aspect, if not every aspect of my life, not just in shul, as an individual, as a cantor, a shaliach tzibur, a messenger of the people, or I rather think of it, a spokesman. As a cantor, I must tell you, I prayed primarily for myself, and at the same time, also tried very hard to help each congregant pray for his or herself. I did not try to replace, but to enhance. I believe that if my actions as a cantor or prayer leader have been pleasing, it is because God has given me a gift, a voice, and a call, which I must use for God's purposes. Through melody and chant, old and new, I tried hard to provide a setting, a mood, an interpretation based on what I was feeling at that particular moment, and as well, hopefully assisted my fellow congregants to do their individual praying. Let me pause for a moment. While I'm very proud of what I accomplished, I think I'm even more proud of the fact that I was president of this congregation and president of the region of the Union of Reformed Jews. I think of myself primarily as a congregant. This all started, by the way, when I was about 6 or 7 years old, living in Outremont in the suburb of Montreal. Started going to shul in a storefront just around the corner from where we lived. We had a ground floor apartment. And there was a balcony out in the front of that apartment, and I used to go and sort of play at being a chazan on that balcony. I'll never forget it. Junior congregation followed. I studied by being a congregant in the congregation whenever I was in Montreal with the most wonderful chazan named Sholom Gisser. This was at Sharazayan in Montreal. It's now Sharazayan Bethel. And he eventually became not only a mentor, but a friend. Unfortunately, he's gone. And then, of course, I was singing with Joan Becko and Elizabeth Wallach in temple choirs, singing with Joyce, and with the Vancouver Jewish Men's Chorus, and with the Chiron Singers that Elizabeth Wallach conducted. Many famous cantors attended workshops that were sponsored by the Guild of Temple Musicians and the Cantorial Association. And I was very fortunate to be able, when I was here as cantor, to attend a lot of the workshops which they put on. I was able to study with them. I was able to do the same at URJ biennials, because they used to have morning minions. This was unknown when I first joined the congregation. Now they have morning minions. And the cantors around the country conduct them. And they bring their own music. And a lot of music that they used at the URJ in those early mornings, minions, I was able to bring back here and use. And of course, my wife and I have been fortunate to be able to travel a bit, all through British Columbia, but in other parts of Canada and the United States. And on Shabbat, we always made it our practice to go to a service. And of course, again, we were able to listen and learn from rabbis and cantors. Now, to whom do I pray? Cantor William Charlin of blessed memory wrote, "There is the desire, indeed the need, to elevate oneself, to enter a spiritual experience, to surmount the ordinary. A transcendent God will be at the center of this religious intent for some. For others, God in man will suffice to motivate the act of elevation. Ani ma'amin, I believe in a power, in a force which does the unexplainable, the force which enables life, and as we say every morning, gives us the ability to discern, to make judgments. To whom do I pray? To God, the power beyond myself. And because I believe there is a partnership between God and man, and that man has been created in God's image, my prayers then also go to my inner self, my soul, my conscience. Rabbi Larry Hoffman, I guess the Reform movement's guru on Jewish ritual, said that Jews pray in many different ways, ranging from davening to silent meditation, from highly elaborate synchronized dramatics to informal spontaneous worship. And if you're thinking about synchronized dramatics, think of a shofar service, which we are going to be taking part in soon. Think about the Avodah service, which describes what took place in the Old Temple. To me, prayers and blessings are totally intertwined. Prayers are very personal, even though we have prayer books. I petition and entreat God, and I bless God through heartfelt praises and thanks. In my mind, praying is talking to God and talking to my conscience at the same time. Every prayer also, you should note when you look at the Amidah, for example, they may be in the daily one. They may be filled with entreaties, prayers that ask for things. Lord, heal. Lord, save Jerusalem. Lord, hear my prayers. But they always end on a positive note. With a praise. What a wonderful guide to life. Always do things that end on a positive note. Now, prayer and study are also intertwined in my mind. Our services incorporate both. We provide a written set of prayers. We use silent prayers. We use personal meditation. We read and study Torah, Haftorah, Talmud. And being in shul so often meant I heard many, many sermons. Many, many, many sermons. Some short, some interminable. I think the line was, he had many good stopping places in that one. But I learned from these sermons. The rabbis who taught me from the earliest days in Montreal to the rabbis here And specifically, I think of Rabbi Harold Rubens of blessed memory, Rabbi Dan, Rabbi Brown, and of course, especially Rabbi Philip Bregman, whom I tried my best to serve for 20 years as his cantor. Through your teachings, I got answers, or often even more questions, and they led me to more study and more answers and more questions. When do I pray? When I'm lying in bed in the middle of the night. Gosh, 2 nights ago, I had written this, and I rewrote it to lying in bed at 4 o'clock in the morning because I couldn't get back to sleep. But I lie in bed in the middle of the night wondering how to deal with a problem, or how to answer a question, or worrying about someone in hospital. And I find myself praying. I find myself very quietly to myself, singing portions of our services, chanting prayers, meditating, using shul melodies and chants, and somehow answers come. The questions have become focused. I learned when I went to graduate school, it was in business administration of all things, that the critical part of anything is discerning what is the problem. Then as many good people who think about it and answer that problem or try to solve it can be equally valid. As many good people as give answers, they can all be valid. But you have to focus on that question, on the problem. And when I was working, I was a labor consultant, I was the director of personnel, I was the secretary treasurer of the school board. When I was negotiating a contract with a union, or handling a grievance, or making a recommendation to a board or to a client, and many of my clients were boards of cities and towns, I would often find myself praying. Again, often using melodies or chants before making a decision, or offering a suggestion, or putting forward a recommendation. When I get up in the morning on Mondays and Wednesdays, Morning Minyan, with its prayers, studies, chants, and melodies, sets me up for days. It used to be in the shul, now it's at home. And of course I pray on the day when I should be resting, Shabbat. You see, for me, praying involves these chants and melodies. You know why? It's so much easier to remember the words when there's a melody to them. Just think of how you learned the ABC. I found when I'm home and when I'm traveling, I pray often. Usually these are prayers of thanks or gratitude. On almost every trip I have made throughout this magnificent province, and I think there's only one road I still want to drive. And indeed around the world, I've always seen, every day, you see something of such beauty, of such specialness, that you stop to take it in and to say a prayer of thanks. Sometimes wordless, or I might use Psalm 100, Mizmor LeTodah, sometimes Modim Anachnu Lach, and V'al Kulam. And at home, we express gratitude at home and thanks with words of emotzi, and certainly with the lighting of candles on Shabbat and on the holy days. It's through study that I ascertain the answers to my petitions. Praying and study results in calls to action and gives direction to my actions in this world. And this, to me, is the essence of Judaism, carrying out actions for good in this world. I need constant reminders and I need constant support from God, from humans, to do the right thing and to do the things right. When dealing with grievances in a labor setting or development of clauses in a contract, I have to always be conscious of tzedek tirdaf, pursue justice. Prayer and study forces me to look beyond myself and within myself. It's a constant, conscious communication. Now, why is music such a powerful agent for me in the act of praying and studying? Well, it enables me to express my thoughts and emotions and enhances my channel when I seek help and support. It channels me. When I realize and confess where I've gone off the mark all too often and I need to seek guidance, music gives me support. Two prayers have had a very profound effect on me in my work and in my relationships. They are calls to good and proper actions. The first one I want to refer to is Elohai Netzor. I was here the other day, and Cantor Shani was rehearsing with a group of people in the back for the High Holy Days, and this is the prayer you were rehearsing. It is silent and very personal. It's the prayer that concludes the central prayer of our communal services. It ends the Amidah. So it's personal, it's silent, but it ends the communal effect. I think it is silent because it is directed in two directions. On one hand, to a power or force beyond me, God, and on the other hand, since I've been created in God's image, to me, to my soul, to remind me to act in good conscience, to my heart, to act in good faith, and to my body, to act strongly. It guides me in how to act. Let me read it to you. In translation, my God, guard my speech from evil and my lips from deception. Before those who slander me, I will hold my tongue. I will practice humility. Open my heart to your Torah, that I may pursue your mitzvot. As for all who think evil of me, cancel their designs and frustrate their schemes. Act for your own sake and for the sake of your power, for the sake of your holiness, for the sake of your Torah, so that your loved ones may be rescued. Save with your power and answer me. The second prayer that I think of very often is at the very, very early part of every service. I refer to it as the 10 personal commandments. The first words are Elu Devarim. These are the things that are limitless, of which a person enjoys the fruit of the world, while the principle remains in the world to come. What that's trying to say is like a bank. You can deposit things in the bank. The deposit will go to heaven. You're not going to draw any of the interest, but you're going to live well. All right, what are these principles? By the way, they're all positive. There's no negativity in it. Honor father and mother. Now, the translation that we have in our book says honor one's father and mother, meaning my own, which I hope I did. But I think the words kibud av va'em mean honor any father and mother. Engage in deeds of compassion. Arrive early for study, morning and evening. Come prepared. Don't come late. Deal graciously with guests. Visit the sick. Provide for the wedding couple. Accompany the dead for burial. be devoted in prayer, and try to make peace among people. And the study of Torah embodies all of this. These two prayers are calls to action, to do good things, and to tikkun olam, and to better relationships between humans. Do prayers work? I can tell you from personal experience, 6 hips, bladder cancer, God knows what else, that prayers for healing have a deep and profound effect. Somehow, I became aware that prayers were being said. And I'm convinced that recovery, in large measure, was speedier and better as a result of all these prayers. And I can tell you, my wife, Glenda, also agrees. Now, what's all this done for me? Judaism, its prayers, its study and teachings have made my life one for which I am truly grateful. Glenda and I have been married for 65 years. We have 2 wonderful children and a wonderful son-in-law. I am more in love with her now than I have ever been. Al Chet. We've missed the mark all too often in my family relations. Thank God that my family forgives me and allows me to hashivenu, to try again and again. Al Chet. We confess sins against God on Yom Kippur, where we missed the mark, and we ask for forgiveness so we can strive to do better. Al Chet, we need also to ask forgiveness from other people that we have wronged, and I do so now. I started off with the words of Shema Kolenu. On the high holy days, there's a section that's added. Hashivenu Adonai elecha, Hashivenu elecha v'noshuva, Chadesh Yameinu, Yameinu, Kekedem. Help us return to you, O Lord. Then truly shall we return. Renew our days as in the past. Forgive us. Shana Tova to each and every one of you. May you all be inscribed for a good year.
Thank you so much, Arthur. It was truly inspiring. I think often about my rabbi and cantor that I grew up with and how they are the soundtrack in my head for all things Jewish and all things synagogue. And you're the soundtrack for so many in this community and for so many in this congregation. You've provided the theme music. You've provided the setting for some of the greatest joys in our members' lives and in comfort in some of their greatest sorrows. And you've done that not just with your voice, Arthur, you've done it with your heart as well. Thank you. And Glenda, who I'm sure is watching at home, thank you too. Karen James is a remarkable woman, as are all of our speakers. Well, Arthur's a remarkable man. And there's no judgment in any of that and everything. But Karen is truly remarkable, an Olympic athlete, a past president of our Jewish Community Federation, a leader in our work with Israel, a leader in so many of our community efforts, and countless, countless other things, Karen, that you do. I was thinking about you a lot as we were thinking about, who to invite and what was the right mix, and the Olympics were coming or going or happening, or who knew or knows. And I thought about all those athletes who had such hopes and dreams to be there last year, who arrived this year with no fans in the stands, no family to greet and cheer for them, and how they had worked their whole lives, most of them, to get to that moment and had to face the disappointment of that, or the great joy of being able to achieve something and not being able to share it with others. And there is a spirituality, I think, to sport. We talked a lot about the mental health of our athletes this year, as Simone Biles and others taught us to be open, to be honest, to be forgiving, to be human. And Karen is going to share with us in part her story tonight. I think she'll share other things as well, about her own experience at the Munich Olympics and how that was such a transformative moment to bring her, as she'll share with us, back into this place, her own tshuva, her own return to Judaism and Jewish peoplehood. And how blessed we are, Karen, that you made that journey back, because we have been so blessed by it and benefited from it for years and years. Thank you. Karen James.
Thank you, Rabbi Dan. And really, I just want to say I'm truly honored to be here in such esteemed company as Sarah Chiachi and Arthur Goodman. And I'm truly honored to be one of the speakers this evening. And like Sarah said, I'll tell you my story, and then you'll see the connection about why and how it works. And as Rabbi Dan said, the Olympics have just happened in Tokyo. If you follow the Olympics or watch them, you'll know that the 2020 Summer Olympics were just held in Tokyo, and that currently right now the Paralympics are on, and Canada's doing quite well. And the opening ceremonies are normally and always a spectacular display and celebration. There's representation from over 200 nations, all holding their flags aloft and marching with pride into the stadium. The Olympic ideals are on display and articulated. The motto of faster, higher, stronger, with the emphasis on peaceful competition, free of racism, religion, and politics. The Tokyo Olympics also marked the 49 years since the Munich Olympic Games, where 11 innocent Israeli athletes were murdered by Palestinian terrorists. Were you aware at these Olympics in July, there was a minute of silence and naming of these 11 Israeli athletes? Some people weren't. It was barely mentioned in our media, but it was in the Israeli media. My story has continued to evolve into a strong and deep connection with my life, my Jewish identity, and my Jewish community. I grew up in an interfaith family, like Sarah. But my father was Jewish, my mother was not, although she volunteered with Hadassah and at times seemed more Jewish than my father. And while there was very little Jewish ritual or religion practiced in our home, I went to Hebrew school 3 times a week at Beth Israel to learn Hebrew, the history of the Jewish people, and how to celebrate the Jewish holidays. My family shared the Jewish holiday traditions with my grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins. And the Passover Seders we celebrated at my grandparents' home still stand out today as my most vivid childhood memory that I cherish. When I was 12 years old, my parents asked me if I wanted a bat mitzvah. My answer was a resounding no. I was by then immersed in the world of competitive swimming, training twice a day, 6 days a week, with dreams of one day representing Canada at the Olympic Games. I did not want anything to interfere. Coincidentally, at that same age of 12, I was also offered the opportunity to participate in the 1965 Maccabiah Games in Israel. I had never heard of the Maccabiah Games, but I was pretty excited at the idea of representing Canada and going to Israel. My father was friends with a Jewish fencer in Vancouver, Peter Bocconi of blessed memory, and he and his wife Vera were designated to look out for me. The flight to Israel included a stopover in Montreal where the rest of the team gathered and where I was immersed in a new and larger Jewish family. The highlights of the competition for me there were seeing Mark Spitz swim, if you've heard of Mark Spitz, training in the large outdoor pool, swimming my races, and making the finals. Throughout, it was amazing to connect with Jewish athletes from around the world, including an Israeli swimmer who had already served in the army. When the games were over, we traveled to the Dead Sea and then Jerusalem. In 1965, Jerusalem was still a divided city. And from a rooftop, sectioned off by barbed wire going down the middle, I looked down and saw Arabs in their flowing robes camped outside. I did not understand the politics of the Middle East at that time, but I did feel the tension. We could not get to the Western Wall, and I only saw the old city from the outside. Before we left Israel, I met with my grandfather's sister and her family. They had emigrated from Poland to Israel in the early 1930s, starting a kibbutz just south of Tel Aviv. I met a cousin my age, and we became instant friends, and in fact, we are still friends today. My grandfather's sister, I had been warned, was not going to be very receptive to me. My mother was not Jewish, and she was offended. I remember her profile as she sat in a chair at a small table beside a window, looking straight ahead as I approached her from the side. She didn't turn to look at me or greet me. I decided to reach out to her by using some of the Hebrew gleaned from those twice-weekly Hebrew classes, and I said Shalom and a few other words, maybe a sentence or two in Hebrew. She turned, and she looked at me, and she smiled. For a long time, I viewed that meeting with my great-aunt and my trip to Israel as my bat mitzvah, or Jewish coming-of-age moment. But for my 60th birthday, I did do a full bat mitzvah. I had such a wonderfully rich experience at those Maccabiah games, but when it was over, I set it aside and focused only on my swimming career. The impact of that experience in Israel only really hit me when I participated as a member of Canada's Olympic swim team at the 1972 Munich Olympic Games. There I was, finally at the Olympic Games, something that I had dreamed of and been working towards for more than 10 years. I remember the opening ceremonies, walking into that big stadium with thousands cheering and the colors of the flags and the uniforms of all the nations standing together. The excitement was palpable and I had goosebumps. I was walking on air. My dream had come true. My race was the next day, the first day of events, and my event, the 200-meter individual medley, was the very first event. I swam my best time, but just missed making the consolation finals. And then I was done. Finally, free from all those long, hard hours of training and pressure. There is this sense of elation and even relief. It was at about the halfway point of the games when my friends and I had been out late celebrating and then in the press building watching one of the games in the Canada-Russia hockey series. We were heading back to the athletes' village. It was late, about 4 in the morning, and we were tired and we didn't want to walk around to the main entrance gate. Instead, we decided to climb the chain link fence where we were standing. There were 3 or 4 men lingering near the fence. It was dark, but I remember one man was wearing a heavy wool sweater and knitted hat. This was early September. I recall a few of the men were wearing tracksuits, but they had no country name on them. They had with them what appeared to be large sport bags. When we started to scale the fence, the 4 men climbed with us. Did they look like athletes? Not at all. But they didn't look threatening to us either. There was very little security around the athletes' village, and the whole Olympics at that point had an air of innocence and wonder. As well, in 1972, the world was a very different place than it is today. It was later that I learned that these men were part of the PLO faction of the Black September terrorist group, who infiltrated the athletes' village, entered the building where the Israeli athletes were staying, killing 2 at the outset, and holding 9 others hostage throughout the day. After scaling the fence, I returned to my dorm and fell asleep, but was awoken to the sound of helicopters flying overhead. When I went to find out what was happening, I ended up confined for security reasons in what was the Canadian Medical Building, and I was there for the rest of the day. From that vantage point, I witnessed much of the drama, including the negotiations between the Palestinian terrorist leader and the German Authority. I could see clearly the window where an armed terrorist was holding the 9 Israelis hostage. I watched the Palestinian leader, wearing a white Panama-type hat, walking jauntily back and forth across the bridge. I could not fully comprehend what was happening, but I could see the weapons. A Canadian diver who was with us in the medical building decided he would sit on the roof to get a better view. Over a loudspeaker, a voice boomed out, "If you don't get down from there, they will shoot you." Later, in the lower level of that building, 10 of us crammed into a shower stall, and peering out of a narrow window, we saw the Israelis being led, blindfolded and hands bound, onto a bus that was to take them to the airport. Shortly after that, I had heard that the 9 Israelis had been freed in an ambush and were safe and alive. Of course, this proved to be false. When the German police stormed their planes at the airport, a gunfight occurred. The Palestinian terrorists threw grenades into the helicopter and plane where the hostages were waiting. All 9 Israelis perished. I attended the memorial service for the 11 Israeli team members, and I remember feeling disillusioned and angry. It seemed a farce. Flags were ordered to be set at half-mast, but the Arab countries raised theirs again. The names of the murdered athletes were never mentioned. The words of Avery Brundage, the IOC president, seemed empty and meaningless to me. His statement, "The games must go on," are infamous to this day. The Olympic Games did continue for another week, but I didn't stay for the closing ceremonies. With a very heavy heart, I left the Olympic Village following that memorial ceremony. Years later, when I read George Jonas's book, Vengeance, I resonated with this line. While nations raised their flags in victory, the Israelis carried their dead out in coffins. In the 7 years between my Maccabiah Games experience in Israel and the 1972 Olympic Games, I did not give much thought to my identity as a Jew. But at those Olympic Games, I became not only acutely aware of my Jewish identity, but also of the threat and danger that seemed to go along with it. And then, once again, I put that whole experience aside and did not think about it for more than 20 years. I did not allow myself to think about the men who had climbed the fence with us that night. I literally pushed it deep into my subconscious. I never told my parents anything. It wasn't until 22 years later when I spoke of the incident with one of the swimmers who was with me at the fence that night in Munich. I think it was about 1994. We sat across a table from each other, and he said to me, "We knew they weren't athletes, didn't we?" And I nodded. During those 24 years after Munich, I finished my university degree, married, sold real estate, and raised a family of 3 wonderful children, but still gave little thought to my Jewish identity. It really was just only 20 years ago that I started to take steps toward reclaiming my heritage. I went through a conversion course and trip to the mikveh. It became important to me that I was halakhically Jewish and that there would be no barriers to my being accepted in the Jewish community. But it was in 2006 when I was invited to chair the swimming for the JCC Maccabiah Games in Vancouver that things changed more. It was the first time we had ever hosted a JCC Maccabiah Games. I think it's been the only time. And I jumped at the opportunity to be able to give back to my Jewish community and through an avenue I knew well, swimming. The local Jewish paper at the time before it was called The Independent. They wanted to write a story about me. They had heard that I had participated in the Munich Olympics, but they didn't know the whole story. Following that interview and published story, I was asked to speak about my Munich Olympic Games experience at the Maccabiah Games opening ceremonies. I was surprised to learn that at every JCC Maccabi and international Maccabiah Games, a special tribute is paid to the Israeli athletes who were murdered in Munich. There were close to 10,000 people in attendance at our JCC Maccabiah Games opening ceremonies. And when I finished speaking, I walked down the steps from the stage and people jumped up to embrace me. I was shaking and started to cry. That speaking experience served as a huge gateway for my reconnection to my Jewish roots and identity. The following year, I went to Israel on a mission with Jewish Federation and participated in the moving ceremonies of Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut. And somehow those two contrasting days were an intense emotional reminder for me of what happened in Munich and in Israel in '65. I came back to Vancouver and made the decision to get more involved as a volunteer in my community. Starting out in campaign, chairing women's philanthropy, to 12 years on the Federation board and 2 years as chair, to sitting on the Jewish Family Services board and a short time as chair, to serving as a board trustee of CJPAC and now an honorary trustee. And currently I'm on the Jewish Agency Board of Governors. In the winter of 2010, I had the honor of carrying the Olympic torch on one of the very last legs of its journey into the opening ceremonies of the Vancouver's 2010 Winter Olympic Games. And as I stood waiting to ignite my torch, I felt proud to be a Canadian. But more importantly, I felt proud to be a Jew. Ever since my experience at Munich, I had held ambiguous feelings about the Olympic Games, and I wasn't sure how much, if at all, I wanted to participate or get involved in Vancouver's Winter Olympics. I entered my name at the last minute in the last round for an opportunity to participate in the torch relay, and as luck would have it, I was given a spot in Vancouver on the last day as one of the last 5 runners before it went into the stadium for the opening ceremonies. Wow, I was thrilled and caught up in all the excitement. Shortly after that, though, and a few months before the Winter Olympic Games began, our Vancouver Holocaust Education Center opened an exhibit called Berlin 36, More Than Just Games. I learned at this exhibit the history of the torch relay. I don't know if you know the history of the torch relay yet or when it started. It was actually started by Hitler for the 1936 Berlin Games, and he had it originate in Greece and travel all through the countries in Europe that he was planning to conquer. My ambiguous feelings returned. And yet I also saw the immense pride and unifying effect the torch relay was having on Canada, and I once again got caught up in the excitement. A week before the Games began in Vancouver, an article appeared in the Globe and Mail. It described a video that was being shown to all torch relay participants as they were being driven to their starting places. It was meant to inspire. The video opened with a segment from Leni Riefenstahl's film commissioned by Hitler for the 1936 Berlin Olympics. The Nazi symbols and salutes had been edited out, but it was clear where the clip had originated. 2 local Jewish academics were quoted in the Globe article as they expressed shock and dismay that a piece from a Hitler propaganda film would be used at our Olympics. That same morning, with all the journalists in town poised for the start of the Olympic Games, I attended a media event at our Holocaust Center. I was asked to say a few words, but I was not prepared. I had not prepared anything, and my emotions nearly overwhelmed me. I spoke out about the video. I also briefly shared my experience from the Munich Olympic Games and how I was already dealing with my ambiguous feelings about participating in the torch relay. That night, I was featured on the 6 o'clock news. The next day, the whole offensive video was removed. The day before the opening ceremonies and my torch relay run, I was featured on the front page of the Vancouver Sun, my Munich Olympic story, my upcoming torch relay run, and my mixed feelings about it and why. There was a picture of me at the media event at the Holocaust Center, but superimposed in the background of that picture was a blown-up photo from Munich of that terrorist in the window, holding the Israelis hostage. It was an image I knew so well. Because of my speaking out about the video and the newspaper article, suddenly my story became the Jewish community story. And that was why my family, friends, rabbis in the Jewish community were there cheering me on for my torch relay run. What was important to me, for me this time, was that I did speak out. I didn't stay quiet. I saw and felt something that seemed wrong to me, and even though I was nervous at that media event, unprepared and a bit scared, I said something. That video had been shown to over 1,000 torchbearers across the country over the previous 90 days. No one had said anything. A horrible terrorist act occurred at Munich, the worst in Olympic history. Justice was never done. The surviving perpetrators never put on trial, let alone held in jail for more than a month. A memorial ceremony in 1972 gave token recognition to what happened, and there has never been an honoring of their memory or the athletes named within an Olympics official ceremony in any other Olympics until Tokyo in 2021. The murdered Israeli athletes, Moshe Weinberg, Yosef Romano, Ze'ev Friedman, David Berger, Yaakov Springer, Eliezer Helfen, Yosef Gutfried, Kahat Shor, Mark Slavin, Andrei Spitzer, Amitzur Shapira. Telling my story has been a transforming experience in my life, and there's been a direct interplay now between speaking out and connecting to my community. It has given my life immense rewards and purpose. In fact, it has become my teshuvah. Speaking out, yes, telling my story, but also telling the story to remind people of what happened in Munich in 1972. I could easily not be standing here. I departed from my religion, my heritage, and my people, but I chose to come back. And while I've had extraordinary opportunities in my life, the most important choices I have made are actually choices all of us can make: to connect with our people, to influence our family and friends to do the same, to get involved, to share our stories, to speak out. I have had this opportunity to share my story to Jewish communities across Canada and across the United States, to many Jewish communities. My journey has led me from complete disengagement to complete commitment to care for the well-being of my Jewish community. I didn't actually set this as a goal, but I took the opportunities that were offered. I followed on a path, and the doors just seemed to open to me. And my community has supported me all along the way. Thank you. Toda Rabbah.
Wow. What? Oh, here. I won't touch it. Karen, thank you so much for that. You know, I'd only heard bits and pieces of the story and read, but had never actually heard you present it. And I know you've presented it many times. Thank you for sharing with all of us and for those that are watching online, for remembering those athletes in your words and your deeds, and for enabling us to partner with you in so many ways as you've led this community to our own gold medals in the types of things that we've achieved as a community here and in Israel and around the world through your leadership. Thank you so much for tonight. Thank you. And thank you to all of our friends. I wanted to say presenters, but presenters isn't the right word. Our teachers. Sarah and Arthur and Karen, we are so blessed to have you in our community and to be able to share you with the broader community. Thank you for tonight and for teaching us. We are about 15 minutes from when we thought we would finish and then go out into the garden to enjoy some refreshments together. So I wanted to just open it up to those that are here. If you have any questions for Arthur or Sarah or Karen, and we'll do our best to to either come up here and answer if you're able to, or Sarah, you can answer from where you are. I'll bring a microphone to you. Does anybody have any questions or things you'd like to hear more about? I'm sure online there are tons of people that would like to be asking questions right now. Okay. So let me just say a couple of things before we head outside. This year's High Holy Days, and this is for you and for those that are watching online, they're going to be different. They're going to be different from last year in that we'll have more than a couple of hundred people in our sanctuary, and so many that are watching online. It's important to us that we feel the sanctity of the moment, and that we try to feel a connection both from here to there, from here and to our homes. So I want to invite everyone and encourage everyone in these days leading up to Rosh Hashanah to reach out to your friends and family in our community, to call them up or send them an email, wish them the Shana Tovah that you would have wished them if you saw them in the synagogue. Record that VidHug video that we sent out so that we can see each other's faces, at least those that are watching online. And if you're coming here to the synagogue and to the sanctuary, though we're asking you not to fist bump or hug or kiss or elbow bump and those kinds of things, with masks on and from a few feet away, please take the opportunity to kibitz and to talk in shul, right? That's what we do. Well, we'll make sure there's time for that. So that we can begin to draw back together as a congregation and a community. I've said a few times, and I'll probably say it a few more times on the high holidays, and I apologize for that, but during this past year, and I know Rabbi Brown joins me in this, I'm sure Cantor Cohen had the same experience, I never felt the need for community more and the value of synagogue more than I did during this time. I mean, we're coming up on the anniversary of 9/11, and I was in a congregation at that time. I remember going to the shul and comforting people as they came to synagogue, not knowing why. But that was a moment. And it went on for a few weeks, and then people went about their lives largely. But in this instance, our communities disappeared. The school community, the gym community, the Pilates community, the sports community that either you played with or you watched your children play and you sat in the stands, they all went away. But this community remained. And it got stronger and it got more important, and then it reached out beyond the walls of our synagogue. We recognize that this is just the hub, this is just the place from which emanates all of those things that Arthur talked about in Elu Devarim, or I should say the Talmud talked about and Arthur quoted. Synagogue is important, not just this synagogue, every synagogue. And so please, during these days leading up to Rosh Hashanah, let's be the broader and most expansive version of our congregation as we can, to reach out, to be present in people's lives, even if it is remotely. And then when you feel safe and comfortable, come join us in this sanctuary. When, if it's not the High Holy Days because there's too many people, we're here on Friday nights, we're here on Saturday mornings. There are masks. We've instituted now a vaccine requirement so that everybody in the building that can be vaccinated will be vaccinated. Come and be with us so that we can be with you. Shana Tova umetuka. A happy year, a sweet year, ubriut, and a healthy year. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Let's head out into the garden. I'm not sure if the refreshments are there quite yet, but I'm sure they will be soon. Or you can stay inside as well. We'll start again, and for those watching online, we'll start with Havdalah at 10 o'clock sharp. Shana Tova.